I never thought a broken toy fire truck would be the thing that finally set me free. The fluorescent lights of the supermart buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I pushed the shopping cart down the toy aisle, my 5-year-old son Noah's small hand gripping the metal bars. His eyes lit up the way they always did when he saw something red and shiny, something that represented hope and heroes, and all the things I desperately wanted him to believe in. The fire truck was plastic and cheap, probably made in some factory overseas, but to Noah it might as well have been made of gold. "Mommy, can I please have it?" His voice was so small, so careful, like he already knew the answer would be no. That sound, that learned hesitation in a child so young, it broke something inside me every single time. I smiled at him, genuinely smiled for maybe the first time that week. "Of course, baby. You've been so good today." That's when Richard's fist slammed into the shopping cart. The metal frame shuddered and crashed into my hip, sending a sharp pain radiating through my side. I stumbled backward, instinctively pulling Noah behind me. Around us, other shoppers stopped mid-reach for their cereals and their canned goods, their heads turning toward the sound like prairie dogs sensing danger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard's face had gone that particular shade of red I'd learned to recognize over the years, the color that meant someone was about to get hurt. His voice boomed through the aisle, echoing off the linoleum floors and the stacked shelves of toilet paper and paper towels. "You think you can just throw our money away on useless garbage?" Our money. The phrase made my stomach turn. I worked 60-hour weeks at the warehouse. I paid for my own groceries with my own debit card. But Richard, my stepfather, the man who'd raised me from age 7 after my biological parents died in a car crash, still acted like every dollar I earned belonged to him and Eleanor. Before I could respond, Richard's hand shot out and yanked the fire truck from Noah's grasp. My son let out a small cry, reaching for it, but Richard raised it high above his head and then smashed it against the floor. The plastic shattered into a dozen pieces, red shrapnel scattering across the white tiles like drops of blood. One piece skittered under the cart, another hit my shoe. Noah started to cry, those big, heaving sobs that only a child who's had his heart broken can produce. I knelt down and tried to pull him into my arms, but Eleanor was already there, her perfectly manicured hand gripping my shoulder like a claw. She leaned in close, so close I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something sour underneath, something rotten. Her voice was sugar-sweet, the kind of sweetness that hides poison. "If you stopped wasting money on useless things for that boy, maybe you wouldn't be so pathetic that you have to live off our charity, Scarlett." I stood up slowly, my whole body shaking. Around us, people had their phones out now. I could see the little red recording lights, could feel the weight of their judgment and their curiosity. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell them that I paid for everything, that I hadn't asked for their help, that they'd manipulated and gaslit me into believing I owed them something for simply existing. "I'm paying for this with my own card," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "My own money from my own job." "Your card?" Eleanor's laugh was sharp and cruel. "The card we gave you? The card that's linked to our account? Don't be ridiculous, Scarlett. You've never had anything that was truly yours. Not since we took you out of that foster home." And there it was, the reminder, the weapon they'd used against me for 18 years. "You owe us. We saved you. You'd be nothing without us." Richard stepped closer, his meaty hand wrapping around my wrist and squeezing until I felt my bones grind together. "You dare talk back to your mother? We pulled you from the trash, Scarlett. You were nothing. You are nothing, and you're turning that boy into another version of your worthless self." Something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped, like a rope pulled too tight for too long, finally giving way. I yanked my arm free, the motion so sudden and violent that Richard actually stumbled backward. I grabbed Noah, who was still crying, still reaching for the broken pieces of his fire truck, and I held him tight against my chest. "We're leaving," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded stronger, harder. "We're leaving, and we're not coming back." I abandoned the cart full of groceries right there in the middle of the aisle, the eggs and milk and bread and all the things I'd carefully selected to stretch my paycheck. I left the broken fire truck on the floor like a crime scene. Behind me, Richard and Eleanor were shouting, their voices rising in pitch and volume, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I turned around, if I looked back, I might lose my nerve. Outside in the parking lot, the early evening air hit my face like cold water. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys in the ignition. Noah was in his car seat in the back, hiccuping through his tears, clutching his jacket like it could protect him from the world. "Baby," I said, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're never going back there. Never, I promise you." He nodded, not really understanding but trusting me anyway, the way children do. The way they trust you to keep them safe even when you failed at it so many times before. As I drove away from that supermart, leaving behind the scene of my public humiliation and the shattered remnants of a cheap toy, I felt something kindle in my chest. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was rage. Pure, clean, clarifying rage. And beneath that rage was something even more powerful. Determination. I spent that night parked in the lot of a 24-hour diner, the kind of place where lost souls congregate at 3 in the morning. Noah slept in the back seat under my jacket, his breathing soft and trusting in a way that made my chest ache. The neon sign above the diner entrance flickered and buzzed, casting red and blue shadows across my phone screen as I scrolled through my contacts. $300 in cash. A checking account I now knew Eleanor and Richard could drain at will, and the studio apartment I'd been so proud of? Paid for with their loan, which meant it was just another chain they'd wrapped around my neck. Maya Chen's name sat in my contacts like a lifeline I wasn't sure I deserved to grab. We'd been close once, back in community college before I dropped out when Noah was born. Before Eleanor and Richard had systematically pruned away everyone who might have helped me see the truth. Maya had tried to stay in touch those first few months, but they'd made it so difficult. Eleanor would forget to give me messages. Richard would need me to run errands during the exact times Maya suggested we meet. Eventually, the texts had stopped coming, and I'd told myself it was for the best, that I didn't deserve friends anyway. At 2 in the morning, with my son sleeping in the back seat and nowhere else to turn, I typed out a message with shaking fingers. "I need help. Can I crash with you?" I stared at it for 10 minutes before hitting send, imagining all the reasons she'd say no. It had been 6 years. She probably didn't even remember me. Or worse, she remembered me and wanted nothing to do with the pathetic girl who'd let herself become a doormat. Her response came through 3 minutes later. "Address is 4, 18 Maple Street, apartment 3B. Doors unlocked. Come now." And the tears came then, hot and overwhelming, blurring my vision until I had to grip the steering wheel to ground myself. A truck driver walked past my car, coffee in hand, and glanced at me with tired understanding before heading back to his rig. I cried because for the first time in years, someone had said yes without demanding to know what they'd get in return, without making me grovel or apologize or promise to do better. Just yes. Come now. Maya's apartment building was a modest 3-story walk up in a neighborhood that actually had trees and functional streetlights. I carried Noah up the stairs, his dead weight in my arms a reminder of how much I was fighting for. The door to 3B was unlocked just like she'd said, but before I could turn the handle, it swung open. Maya stood there in an oversized t-shirt and flannel pants, her hair in a messy bun, and she looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. Older, more settled, but with the same warm eyes that had made me trust her all those years ago in our freshman English class. She took one look at my tear-streaked face and Noah's sleeping form in my arms and didn't say a word. She just stepped aside and pointed down the hall. "Spare bedrooms to the right," she said quietly. "Fresh sheets. We'll talk in the morning." The bed was soft in a way I'd forgotten beds could be. The sheets smelled like lavender fabric softener and fresh air, like someone who had the time and energy to care about such things. Noah barely stirred as I laid him down and tucked the comforter around his small body. I climbed in beside him, fully clothed, and he instinctively curled into me the way he used to when he was a baby, seeking warmth and safety in my presence. I held him in that borrowed bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the ways I'd failed him by staying so long. Every time Eleanor had called him that boy instead of using his name. Every time Richard had yelled at him for being too loud, too messy, too much of a reminder that I'd made mistakes. Every birthday they'd forgotten. Every Christmas where Chloe had gotten piles of presents while Noah got a cheap toy from the dollar store if he got anything at all. I'd told myself I was protecting him by keeping the peace, by not making waves, by being grateful for whatever scraps they threw our way. But I'd been wrong. I'd been teaching him that love looked like cruelty, that family meant pain, that he should accept whatever treatment he got because he wasn't worth more. Morning came with the smell of pancakes. Real pancakes, from scratch. Not the frozen kind I microwaved on good days, or the Pop-Tarts we ate most mornings when I was too exhausted to manage anything else. Noah woke up confused, looking around the unfamiliar room until his eyes found me and relaxed. "Where are we, Mommy?" We're at my friend Maya's house, I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. We're gonna stay here for a little while, okay? He nodded, still drowsy, and let me lead him out to the kitchen. Maya had set the small table with real plates and real silverware, not the mismatched plastic stuff from the dollar store that I'd been using. There were pancakes stacked high, scrambled eggs, even fresh strawberries cut into slices. Noah's eyes went wide. Is this all for us? He whispered, like he was afraid if he spoke too loud the food would disappear. All for you, buddy, Maya said, crouching down to his level with a warm smile. Eat as much as you want. He ate like he was starving, which I realized with a sinking feeling he probably was. When was the last time I'd made him a real breakfast? When was the last time we'd had fresh fruit? I'd been so focused on just surviving, as on making it through each day, without triggering Richard's rage or Eleanor's cold disappointment, that I'd stopped noticing how little we actually had, how small our lives had become. While Noah watched cartoons in the living room, his belly finally full, Maya and I sat at her small kitchen table with coffee mugs warming our hands. She didn't ask questions right away, just waited, giving me space to find the words, so I told her everything. I told her about being 7 years old, about the car accident that took my parents on a rainy Tuesday night, about the foster homes, 3 of them in 18 months, each one making me feel more disposable than the last. About Eleanor and Richard showing up at the group home like saviors, all smiles and promises about giving me a real family, a permanent home, a chance at a normal life. I was so grateful, I said, my voice cracking. So desperate to be worth keeping. I didn't see it at first, how they used that against me. The comments had started small. Little observations about my appearance that felt like concern but landed like criticism. Are you sure you want seconds, sweetheart? You're getting a little thick around the middle. That outfit is very bold. Are you trying to get attention? Your grades are fine, but Chloe always got straight A's. Maybe you're just not as academically inclined. Death by 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to dismiss, to tell myself I was being too sensitive, too ungrateful for questioning people who'd been kind enough to take me in. Then the cuts got deeper. Richard's temper, which I'd initially thought was just stress from work, became a constant threat. He'd explode over nothing, slamming doors and punching walls and grabbing my arm hard enough to leave fingerprint bruises that I'd cover with long sleeves. Eleanor's manipulation was colder, more calculated. She'd orchestrate situations where I'd fail, then comfort me while reminding me how much I needed them, how lost I'd be without their guidance. And then I got pregnant, I said, wrapping my hands tighter around the coffee mug. I was 19. His name was Jake, and he seemed nice enough until I told him I was keeping the baby. He was gone within a week. Changed his number, dropped out of school, just vanished. Maya reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She didn't say it would be okay, or that things happened for a reason, or any of the meaningless platitudes people usually offered. She just held my hand and let me continue. Eleanor and Richard used it as proof of everything they'd always said about me. That I was stupid, that I made bad choices, that I was fundamentally broken. But they also saw an opportunity. They convinced me I couldn't possibly manage on my own, not with a baby and no degree and no real job skills. They set up bank accounts to help me, joint accounts where they were primary and I was secondary. They said it was so they could transfer money easily, so they could help with bills when I came up short. What I didn't understand until years later was that it gave them complete control. Every dollar I earned from my warehouse job went into those accounts. Eleanor would dole it back out to me in small amounts, always with strings attached, always with reminders of what I owed them. The apartment I lived in? They'd loaned me the deposit and first month's rent, which meant it wasn't really mine. The car I drove? Titled in Richard's name, just in case I couldn't keep up with payments. Even Noah's clothes and toys came with receipts, literal and metaphorical, of what I owed. And Chloe? Maya asked gently. I let out a bitter laugh. Chloe is their real daughter, their golden child who can do no wrong. She's 27 now, has her MBA, works in marketing for some big firm downtown. She's engaged to this guy Brett, whose family has money and connections and all the right credentials. Eleanor and Richard are spending a fortune on the wedding, tens of thousands of dollars, while I'm buying Noah's shoes from Walmart clearance racks. The worst part wasn't even the money, though. It was the way Chloe looked at me, like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. The way she'd called me last week, not to ask how I was or whether Noah was doing well in kindergarten, but to inform me that I'd be helping with her engagement party. Not as a bridesmaid. Not even as a guest, as unpaid labor. You'll set up chairs and help serve drinks, she'd said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Mom and Dad are inviting some important people, and they want everything to look professional. You owe them this, Scarlett. After everything they've done for you." Maya listened to all of it without interrupting, her coffee growing cold in her hands. When I finally ran out of words, when my voice was hoarse and my eyes were dry from crying, she sat back and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. I nodded. "Why are you still trying to prove yourself to people who never valued you in the first place, Scarlett? When are you going to start living for you and Noah?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to answer, to defend myself, to explain all the reasons why I couldn't just leave, why I owed them, why I needed them. But the words wouldn't come, because she was right. I'd spent 18 years trying to earn love from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. 18 years making myself smaller and quieter and more convenient. 18 years believing the lie that I owed them something for the basic act of not abandoning me to the foster system. "I don't know how to live any other way," I whispered. "Then it's time to learn," Maya said firmly. She stood up and grabbed her laptop from the counter, opened it, and started typing. "I got you a job." I blinked at her. "What?" "I work in logistics for a major shipping company. We're always hiring for night shifts at the warehouse. It's not glamorous, but it pays 15 an hour plus overtime, and they don't care about your education or your work history. They just need reliable people who show up and work hard. You start Monday if you want it." "Maya, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm telling you. And before you start with the guilt trip about imposing or owing me, stop. You and Noah can stay here as long as you need. I have the space, and honestly..." She smiled, and there was steel underneath the warmth. "I've been waiting 6 years for you to wake up and realize you deserve better. I'm not about to let this opportunity slip away." I wanted it. God, I wanted it so badly I could taste it. Something that was mine, something Eleanor and Richard couldn't touch or control or take credit for. A job I got because of my own efforts, not because they'd pulled strings or called in favors. Money that would go into an account with only my name on it. "Monday," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. "I'll be there Monday." That Monday, I started the night shift at the warehouse. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., sorting packages and loading trucks and losing myself in the physical labor. My body ached in new ways, muscles I'd forgotten I had screaming in protest. But it was good pain, earned pain, the kind that came from working towards something rather than just surviving another day. Maya watched Noah during those hours, refusing payment no matter how many times I tried to force cash into her hands. "Save every penny," she insisted. "You're going to need it." During the day, while Maya worked her own job, I slept in restless fits and starts. 2 hours here, 3 hours there. Never quite enough, but somehow sufficient. I'd wake up, get Noah to the daycare program. Maya had helped me find one, with a sliding scale for payment that meant I could actually afford it. Then I'd come back to the apartment and try to sleep more before it was time to pick him up, feed him dinner, and head to my shift. It was exhausting. There were days I ran on 3 hours of sleep and gas station coffee and pure stubbornness. Days when my body felt like lead and my eyes burned and I wasn't sure I could lift one more box, scan one more package, make it through one more hour. But I did. Because for the first time in my adult life, I had money that was actually mine. I opened a new bank account at a credit union across town, one Eleanor and Richard had never heard of. I deposited my paychecks there and watched the balance grow with something like wonder. $300, $500, $1,000. Each number represented possibility, represented freedom, represented choices I could make for myself and Noah. Noah adjusted better than I'd expected, better than I probably deserved given how much I'd uprooted his life. He liked Maya, liked the way she talked to him like a person instead of a problem. He liked his new daycare where the teachers learned his name on the first day and put his artwork up on the walls, where no one compared him to other better-behaved children or made him feel like his existence was an inconvenience. He made a friend there, a little boy named Tyler who had bright red hair and missing front teeth, and a grandmother who picked him up every afternoon at 3 o'clock. I'd see her sometimes when I came to get Noah, this woman who couldn't have been more than 60 but had the kind of weathered kindness that spoke of a life fully lived. She'd scoop Tyler up like he weighed nothing, spin him around, ask about his day with genuine interest. One afternoon, I watched her inspect a scraped knee Tyler had gotten from the playground. "Look at you, trying those monkey bars," she said, her voice full of pride. "You're so brave, trying something new even when it's scary. Grandma is so proud of you, little hero." Tyler beamed like she'd handed him the moon and stars. Noah, standing beside me with his backpack hanging off one shoulder, watched them with an expression that made my heart crack. In the car, he was quiet for a long time. Too quiet. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, waiting for whatever question was building behind his eyes. "Mommy?" he said, finally, his voice small. "Why don't Grandma and Grandpa ever call me brave?" I had to pull over. My hands were shaking too hard to keep the car steady, and my vision was blurring with tears I couldn't let him see. I put the car in park on a quiet side street and turned around in my seat to look at him. "Come here, baby," I said, unbuckling him and pulling him into the front seat with me. I held his little face in my hands. This perfect, innocent, beautiful boy who deserved so much more than the family he'd been given. Some people don't know how to love right. It's not because of anything you did or anything wrong with you. It's because of something broken in them. "Did I make them mad?" he asked, and his lip was trembling. "No, sweetheart, no. You didn't do anything wrong. You are brave and kind and smart and funny, and you are the very best thing that has ever happened to me. Do you understand? You are the best thing." He nodded, but I could see he didn't really believe it. How could he, when every interaction with Eleanor and Richard had taught him he was tolerated at best, unwanted at worst? When he'd learned before he could even tie his shoes that love was conditional and approval had to be earned, and even then, it was never quite enough. That wound, that confusion on my baby's face, that was what crystallized my resolve into something harder and sharper than determination. I wasn't just going to walk away quietly. I wasn't going to let them forget about us and move on with their perfect lives and their perfect daughter and their charitable donations that made them look like pillars of the community. They'd spent years making me feel worthless, teaching my son that he wasn't enough. They were going to pay for that, not with violence or vandalism or anything that would let them play the victim. No, they were going to pay with the one thing they valued more than anything else, their reputation. I was going to expose them for exactly what they were, and I was going to do it in a way they'd never see coming. The opportunity came in the form of a cream-colored envelope shoved under Maya's door. Inside was a letter from Richard, written in his blocky handwriting that I'd know anywhere. It was an invitation, though it was worded more like a summons. Chloe's engagement party was in 6 weeks. I was expected to help set up and serve. There would be important people there, city council members and local business owners, people Eleanor and Richard wanted to impress. I was to be useful but invisible, present but not acknowledged. The letter ended with a reminder that I owed them this, after everything they'd done for me. I read that letter 3 times, feeling my anger grow with each pass. Then I smiled, because Richard and Eleanor had just handed me exactly what I needed: access. I spent the next few weeks carefully, methodically planning. Maya worked for a logistics company that partnered with an event planning business, and she got me a legitimate job with them as temporary help for Chloe's party. This gave me a reason to be there, a uniform to wear, and access to all the behind-the-scenes details, where things would be set up, who was coming, what the schedule looked like. But more importantly, it gave me time to dig into Eleanor and Richard's finances. You see, they ran their own business, a consulting firm that also managed a charitable foundation. They loved to talk about that foundation, loved the tax breaks and the social status it brought them. What they didn't love to talk about was how the money actually moved through it. I reached out to Daniel Park, a young lawyer Maya had introduced me to at a company barbecue. He specialized in financial fraud cases and had a reputation for taking on clients who couldn't afford his usual fees if he believed in their cause. I met him at a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning, Noah coloring at the table beside us, and I told him my story. Not the emotional parts, not the abuse, but the financial parts. The accounts they controlled, the money they'd taken from me, the foundation that seemed to pay for an awful lot of their personal expenses. Daniel listened, taking notes on a legal pad, his expression growing more serious as I talked. When I finished, he asked if I had any proof. I didn't, not yet, but I knew where it would be. In their home office. In the files they kept in the converted bedroom they used as their headquarters. The bedroom I'd cleaned every week when I still lived with them, the files I'd organized alphabetically like they'd taught me, never understanding what I was looking at. If you can get me copies of those financial records, invoices, bank statements, anything that shows money from the charitable foundation being used for personal expenses, I can file a complaint with the IRS and the State Attorney General's office, Daniel said. He pushed his glasses up his nose and looked at me seriously. But Scarlett, this is going to get ugly. They're going to know it was you. Are you ready for that? I thought about Noah's face when Richard smashed his fire truck. I thought about every time Eleanor had called me worthless. every time Richard had grabbed me hard enough to leave bruises, every birthday they'd celebrated Chloe while forgetting mine. I thought about my son learning to expect nothing, to be grateful for scraps, to make himself small and quiet and unobtrusive. "I'm ready," I said. Getting the documents was easier than I'd expected. As part of the event setup team, I had legitimate reasons to be in their house the week before the party, checking sightlines and electrical outlets and table placements. Eleanor and Richard were so focused on making sure everything was perfect for their precious Chloe that they barely noticed me. To them, I was just another servant, another piece of furniture. Their home office was unlocked. Why wouldn't it be? In their minds, who would dare look through their private papers? Certainly not Scarlett, their broken, grateful, obedient charity case. I used the scanner app on my phone, the one Daniel had recommended, and I worked quickly and methodically. Every invoice for office supplies that was actually furniture for their home. Every business dinner that was actually date night. Every receipt for Chloe's tuition, her car, her clothes, all run through the foundation's accounts. It took me 45 minutes to document everything I needed, and when I was done, I put every file back exactly where I'd found it. I sent the scans to Daniel that night. He called me 2 hours later, his voice tight with barely contained excitement. "This is enough," he said. "This is definitely enough. But we need to be smart about how we do this. If we just file the complaint, it'll take months to investigate. But if we can get these documents in front of the right people at the right time, in a very public way, the pressure will force immediate action." "The engagement party," I said, understanding immediately. "Everyone who matters in this town will be there." "Everyone who matters," Daniel agreed, including Mayor Thompson, who I know for a fact is very serious about rooting out charity fraud in the community. It's been one of his campaign platforms. The night of Chloe's engagement party, I put on my server's uniform, black pants and a white button-down shirt, and I looked at myself in Maya's bathroom mirror. I looked tired. I had circles under my eyes and I'd lost weight from the stress and the long hours. But I also looked determined, strong. For the first time in my life, I looked like someone who wasn't going to back down. Noah was with me. I'd told Maya I needed him there, needed him to see that I would stand up for him, for us. She'd argued at first, worried he'd be traumatized, but I'd insisted. He was 5 years old enough to start learning that sometimes you have to fight for yourself, that you don't have to accept being treated like garbage just because someone tells you that's all you deserve. The venue was a hotel ballroom downtown, all crystal chandeliers and white linens and roses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Guests were arriving in expensive cars, women in cocktail dresses and men in suits. I saw the mayor pull up in his town car, saw the local news anchor who covered the society pages, saw all the people Eleanor and Richard had been trying to impress for years. I entered through the service entrance, Noah's small hand in mine. He was clutching his new fire truck, the blue one we'd bought last week to replace the red one Richard had smashed. It was his security blanket now, proof that I could give him things, that I would protect him. Eleanor spotted me first. Her face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, recognition, anger, disgust. She bore down on me in her silver evening gown, her heels clicking on the marble floor like warning shots. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, grabbing my elbow and trying to steer me away from the main ballroom. "And why did you bring that child?" "I'm working," I said calmly, pulling my arm free. "Remember, you told me to be here. You said I owed you." Richard appeared beside her, his face already flushed with alcohol or anger or both. "You look like trash?" he spat. "This is an important night for Chloe, and you show up looking like a homeless person?" "I'm in a server's uniform," I pointed out. "You know, because you told me I'd be serving tonight?" People were starting to stare. Eleanor's smile was frozen, brittle. "Richard, dear, let's discuss this later. People are watching." "Let them watch," Richard growled, but he lowered his voice. "After tonight, you're done. We're done with you. You're nothing but an ungrateful leech, and we're cutting you off completely. Do you understand? No more money, no more help. You'll see how far you get on your own." "I understand perfectly," I said. Then I smiled, and it must have been a terrible smile because Eleanor actually took a step back. In fact, I'm counting on it. I left them standing there and went to do my job. I served champagne and canapes. I cleared empty plates. I smiled politely at guests who didn't see me as a person, just as a function. And I waited for my moment. It came during the speeches. Chloe and her fiancé Brett were at the front of the room, all white teeth and hollow promises about eternal love. Eleanor was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the proud mother. Richard was shaking hands and accepting congratulations like he'd personally arranged his daughter's happiness. I slipped out of the ballroom and found Mayor Thompson in the lobby, checking his phone. He was a tall black man in his 50s with a reputation for being tough on corruption. Beside him was his assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer who I'd seen at several city events. Mayor Thompson? I approached him with a manila envelope in my hands, the copies of all the documents I'd scanned. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something you need to see. It's about tonight's hosts." He looked up, curious rather than annoyed. "And you are?" "Nobody important," I said honestly. "But these documents are. They show how Richard and Eleanor Morrison have been using their charitable foundation to fund personal expenses. I believe you've been very vocal about addressing charity fraud in the community." Jennifer took the envelope, her expression skeptical, but as she opened it and began flipping through the pages, her eyebrows rose. She showed something to the mayor, who went very still and very serious. "Where did you get these?" he asked me. "I used to live with them," I said. "They're real. Every receipt, every invoice, every bank statement, all showing foundation money being used for personal purchases with falsified expense reports to cover it up." Quote. The mayor looked at me for a long moment, then at Noah, who was standing beside me clutching his fire truck. Something in his expression shifted, softened. "Wait here," he said. I didn't wait. I went back into the ballroom because I wanted to see this. I wanted to watch their perfect night crumble. I'd earned that much. The mayor strode into the ballroom with Jennifer at his heels. He walked right up to Richard, who was in the middle of laughing at someone's joke, and the look on his face stopped all conversation in the immediate area. "Richard Morrison?" the mayor said, his voice carrying. "I need to speak with you and your wife immediately. Outside." Eleanor's face went pale under her makeup. "Mayor Thompson, surely whatever this is about can wait until after the party?" "No," he said flatly. "It can't." The argument started in the lobby but quickly grew loud enough that everyone in the ballroom could hear it. Richard's voice bellowing denials. Eleanor's sharp accusations that this was all a misunderstanding. The mayor's calm, relentless questioning about specific expenses, specific dates, specific lies. The news anchor I'd seen earlier pulled out her phone. So did half the guests. In minutes, people were live streaming the confrontation, posting it to social media, texting their friends. The veneer of respectability that Eleanor and Richard had spent decades building was cracking in real time, in front of everyone who mattered. I stood at the edge of the crowd, Noah beside me, and I watched. Chloe was crying, her mascara running, Brett looking around desperately like he was trying to find the nearest exit. Guests were whispering, pulling up news articles about charity fraud on their phones, piecing together what was happening. Then Eleanor saw me. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw the exact moment she understood. Her face contorted with rage, and she pushed through the crowd, Richard following behind her like a bulldozer. "You," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "You did this, you ungrateful, vindictive little bitch, after everything we did for you." "You mean after you used me?" I said quietly. The room had gone silent. Everyone was watching now, phones out, recording. "After you controlled my money, isolated me from anyone who might help me, made me feel worthless so I'd be easier to manipulate. After you taught your daughter to look down on me and taught my son that he wasn't good enough to deserve basic kindness." Richard lunged forward, but Daniel was suddenly there, stepping between us. When had he arrived? He must have been waiting outside, ready to back me up. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, sir," Daniel said calmly. "Not in front of all these witnesses." "This is assault," Richard sputtered. "She's destroying our reputation with lies." "They're not lies," I said. "Every document I provided is real. You stole from your own charity. You used money meant for people in need to pay for your lifestyle, and you falsified tax documents to cover it up. That's fraud, Richard. That's a crime." Eleanor's hands were shaking. For the first time in my life, I saw her look genuinely afraid. "You think this makes you better than us? You think destroying our family makes you strong?" "No," I said honestly. "It makes me free." The police arrived 20 minutes later, called by the mayor once he'd reviewed enough of the documents to understand the scope of the fraud. They didn't arrest anyone that night, but they asked Richard and Eleanor to come to the station for questioning. The engagement party dissolved into chaos, guests fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, Chloe sobbing in the corner while Brett tried to comfort her and probably reconsidered his life choices. I took Noah's hand and we walked out through the front doors of that hotel. The summer night air was warm and clean. Behind us, I could hear Eleanor screaming my name, but I didn't turn around. I'd spent 18 years turning around, going back, giving them one more chance. I was done turning around. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Local news, social media, even some of the regional papers picked it up. Prominent local couple under investigation for charity fraud. The photos were perfect. Richard and Eleanor looking shocked and angry, their faces twisted into something ugly. All their carefully constructed respectability gone in one night. The investigation moved quickly after that. When there's public pressure and media attention and a mayor who's made fighting corruption his signature issue, these things tend to get fast-tracked. Within 2 weeks, their accounts were frozen. Within a month, criminal charges were filed. By the end of the summer, they'd lost almost everything: their business, their home, their social standing. Chloe quietly called off her engagement and moved to another state. As for me and Noah, we moved into our own apartment, a real one that I paid for with money I actually earned. It was small, just a one-bedroom where Noah slept in the bedroom and I took the couch, but it was ours. No strings attached. No one to tell me I owed them for the privilege of existing. Maya helped me get promoted at work. I moved from the night shift to a day position in inventory management that paid better and had benefits. Health insurance for me and Noah, dental, vision. Things I'd never had before because Eleanor and Richard had told me I couldn't afford them, that I needed to rely on their coverage, that I couldn't make it on my own. Noah thrived. He made friends at his new school. He joined a soccer team that Maya's company sponsored. He laughed more, talked more, stopped asking when we were going to see Grandma and Grandpa. When I tucked him in at night, he'd hold his blue fire truck and tell me about his day, about the goals he scored and the pictures he drew and the books his teacher read to the class. He was becoming who he was meant to be, without the weight of their judgment crushing him. 3 months after the engagement party disaster, I ran into Chloe at a grocery store. The same supermart where Richard had smashed Noah's toy, actually. The universe has a sense of irony. She looked different. Smaller somehow, like she'd deflated. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of her usual designer clothes. She saw me and froze in the produce section, her hand hovering over a bag of apples. "Scarlett," she said. "Just my name, nothing else." I waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. "Are you happy now?" she asked finally. "You destroyed them. You destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "I just stopped lying for them. I stopped covering up what they were doing." "They destroyed themselves, Chloe. They made the choice to steal from charity. They made the choice to abuse and manipulate. I just decided I wasn't going to pretend it was okay anymore. They're losing the house," she said, and there were tears in her eyes now. "Dad might go to prison. Mom had to get a job at a call center. Do you know how humiliating that is for them?" "Yes," I said. "I do, because that's how they made me feel every single day for 18 years. Humiliated, small, worthless. And you stood there and watched and never once told them to stop." "I didn't know," she started, but I cut her off. "You knew. You just didn't care, because as long as they were treating me like garbage, they were treating you like gold. You benefited from my misery, Chloe. So, don't ask me to feel sorry for you now that it's all fallen apart." I left her there in the produce section, and I found Noah in the toy aisle, right where we'd been that awful day, 3 months ago. He was looking at the fire trucks again, but this time there was no fear in his eyes, no careful hesitation. He picked up a green one and showed it to me with a big smile. "Can I get this one too, Mommy? For my collection?" "Sure, baby," I said, and I meant it. "You can have as many as you want." As we walked to the checkout, I saw Richard and Eleanor through the window. They were outside, getting out of an old sedan that must have been at least 15 years old. Richard's face was gaunt, aged. Eleanor's hair had gray roots showing. They looked like what they were, people facing the consequences of their actions for the first time in their lives. They saw me through the window. Saw me and Noah, saw the toys in our cart, saw us happy and free. Eleanor's face twisted with something that might have been rage or might have been regret. Richard just looked away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated or victorious. I just felt free. The weight I'd been carrying for 18 years, the weight of their expectations and manipulations and abuse, was gone. I wasn't their victim anymore. I wasn't their charity case or their scapegoat or their punching bag. I was just Scarlett, a mom with a good job and a happy kid and a future that belonged to us. Noah and I walked out of that supermart into the bright afternoon sun. Behind us, Eleanor and Richard were arguing about something, their voices carrying across the parking lot. But we were already in the car, already pulling out, already leaving them behind. That night, after Noah was asleep with his new green fire truck lined up next to his blue one on the shelf I'd installed in his room, I sat on my couch and thought about everything that had happened. About the moment in the toy aisle when I'd finally said enough. About the fear and anger and determination that had carried me through. About the risk I'd taken and how easily it could have gone wrong. But mostly I thought about Noah's laugh that evening when I'd spun him around in the parking lot, both of us dizzy and happy and free. I thought about how he'd started sleeping through the night without nightmares, how he'd stopped flinching when adults raised their voices, how he was learning what love actually looked like, patient and kind and unconditional. The revenge I'd taken wasn't the investigation or the public humiliation or the criminal charges. Those were just consequences, the natural result of Eleanor and Richard's own actions finally catching up with them. The real revenge was this: living well, raising my son in love and safety, proving that everything they'd said about me, all the ways they'd told me I was worthless and incapable and destined to fail, was wrong. I built a life they said I couldn't have. I became the mother they said I could never be. I found my own worth without needing their approval or their acknowledgement or their lies about what I owed them. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that broken red fire truck scattered across the supermart floor. About how something so small, so insignificant to everyone else, had been the catalyst for everything that came after. About how the smallest act of cruelty can become the breaking point that changes everything. A year passed, then 2. Noah turned 7, then 8. He grew taller, stronger, more confident. He joined the school orchestra and learned to play the violin. He made the honor roll. He had friends who came over for sleepovers and birthday parties in our small apartment. Normal things, ordinary things, things that felt like miracles because for so long I'd thought we'd never have them. I got promoted again at work, this time to a management position. I had people reporting to me, people who looked to me for guidance and leadership. Me, the girl who'd been told her whole life that she was too stupid, too worthless, too fundamentally broken to ever amount to anything. I led meetings and made decisions and earned the respect of my colleagues through competence and hard work, not through manipulation or control. Maya became more than just a friend. She became family, the kind you choose rather than the kind you're born into. She was Noah's godmother in every way that mattered. She came to his school concerts and soccer games. She taught him to cook her grandmother's dumplings. She was there on the hard days when single parenthood felt overwhelming, when I was exhausted and scared and wondering if I was doing any of this right. Daniel became a friend too. He never charged me for his legal work, told me that bringing down people like Eleanor and Richard was why he'd become a lawyer in the first place. He helped me file for full custody of Noah, helped me navigate the legal complexities of cutting all ties with my adoptive family. He made sure that Eleanor and Richard had no legal claim to my son, no way to worm their way back into our lives even if they wanted to. The criminal trial happened in the fall of our second year of freedom. I didn't attend most of it. I didn't need to sit in that courtroom and relive everything they'd done, but I was there for the sentencing. Daniel said I should be, that I'd earned the right to see justice done. Richard got 18 months in a minimum security facility for tax fraud and embezzlement. Eleanor got 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. Their charitable foundation was dissolved. They were ordered to pay back over $200,000 in misused funds. Their reputations, the thing they'd valued more than anything, were destroyed beyond repair. I sat in the back of that courtroom and watched Richard's face when the judge read the sentence. He looked old and small and defeated. Eleanor was crying, but they weren't the manipulative tears I'd seen her use so many times before. These were real, the tears of someone who'd finally lost everything they'd spent their lives building on lies and cruelty. They both looked back at me before they were led away. Richard's face was full of hate, but Eleanor's was something different. Something that might have been understanding, or regret, or just the hollow recognition that actions have consequences, and she was finally facing hers. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction. I just felt closure. This chapter was over. They couldn't hurt us anymore. Chloe reached out once more, about 6 months after the sentencing. She sent me a letter, forwarded through Daniel's office. In it, she apologized. Really apologized, not the half-hearted, "I'm sorry you feel that way," that narcissists use when they're trying to manipulate you back into their orbit. She said she'd been in therapy. that she was beginning to understand how toxic our family had been, how she'd been complicit in my abuse because it benefited her to be. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, didn't expect me to want a relationship with her. She just wanted me to know that she was sorry, that she saw now what she'd been too selfish or too blind to see before, that she hoped Noah and I were happy, that we were building the life we deserved. I kept that letter. I didn't respond to it, but I kept it. Maybe someday I'd be ready to have a relationship with Chloe, if she continued to do the work of becoming a better person. Maybe not. But keeping that letter felt like holding on to the possibility of reconciliation without the pressure of having to make it happen right now. The apartment we'd moved into, the small one-bedroom where I'd slept on the couch, eventually became too cramped. On Noah's 9th birthday, we moved into a 2-bedroom place in a better neighborhood. It had a small balcony where I grew tomatoes and basil. Noah's room had space for his growing collection of fire trucks, now dozens of them in every color, lined up on shelves like a rainbow of resilience. He still slept with that blue fire truck sometimes, the one I'd bought him after we left Maya's apartment. He was getting too old for toys like that. His friends were into video games and sports equipment now, but he held on to it anyway. I understood why. It wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol of the moment our lives changed, the moment I chose him over the people who'd spent years telling me he was a burden. On quiet evenings, after Noah had finished his homework and we'd eaten dinner together at our small kitchen table, he'd sometimes ask me about Eleanor and Richard. Not often, but occasionally, like he was trying to piece together his own history, trying to understand where he'd come from and why things had been the way they were. I answered his questions honestly, in age-appropriate ways. I told him that sometimes people are hurt, and instead of healing themselves, they hurt other people. I told him that Eleanor and Richard had their own pain, their own damage, but that it didn't excuse what they'd done. I told him that we all have choices, every day, about what kind of people we want to be. They'd chosen cruelty. I'd chosen to protect him. And every day, we gotta keep making that choice. Do you hate them? He asked me once, when he was 10 years old and starting to understand more complex emotions. I thought about it carefully. No, I said finally. I don't hate them. Hate takes energy, and I'd rather spend that energy loving you and building our life. What I feel is indifference. They're just people who used to be in my life and aren't anymore. Do you think they're sorry? He pressed. I think Eleanor might be, I said. Richard, probably not. But their feelings aren't my responsibility, Noah. My responsibility is to you and to myself, to make sure we're safe and happy and healthy. That's enough. He nodded, processing this. Then he said something that nearly broke my heart with its wisdom. I'm glad you chose us, Mom. I'm glad you decided we were worth fighting for. You were always worth fighting for, I told him, pulling him close. Always. By the time Noah was 12, our lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'd been promoted to regional inventory manager, overseeing multiple warehouses across 3 states. The job required some travel, but Maya and Daniel had become such integral parts of our support system that I never worried about Noah being cared for when I was away. He'd started middle school, joined the robotics club, developed a passion for coding that had him spending hours building programs and games. We were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way I'd never imagined possible during those dark years of abuse and manipulation. We had movie nights and inside jokes. We took road trips to national parks. We built blanket forts in the living room even though he was getting too big for them. We had the kind of ordinary, beautiful life that Eleanor and Richard had told me I'd never achieve. I dated occasionally, though I was careful about who I brought around Noah. There was a kind man named Marcus who worked in IT at one of our client companies. We went out for a few months, but ultimately realized we were better as friends. There was Sarah, a teacher I met at one of Noah's parent-teacher conferences, and we had coffee a few times before mutually deciding we weren't quite right for each other. I wasn't in a hurry. I'd spent so many years in toxic relationships that I was content to take my time, to be selective, to prioritize my own peace and Noah's stability over the societal pressure to couple up. Then, 3 years after the trial, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Scarlett? The voice was thin, shaky, older than I remembered. It took me a moment to place it. Eleanor? My hand tightened on the phone. I know I have no right to call you, she said quickly, before I could hang up. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but Richard is dying. Pancreatic cancer. He has maybe a month left, and he wants to see Noah before he goes. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Richard was dying. The man who'd smashed my son's toy, who'd grabbed me hard enough to bruise, who'd called me worthless and broken, was dying. And he wanted to see my son. No, I said finally. Please, Eleanor said, and she was crying now. Please, Scarlett. He's changed. Prison changed him. The cancer has changed him. He wants to apologize, to make amends before it's too late. That's not my problem, I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice was. He spent years making my life hell, Eleanor. He made Noah feel unwanted and unloved. If he wants to make amends, he should have started years ago, when it mattered. I'm not going to subject my son to a deathbed reconciliation just to make Richard feel better about himself before he dies. You're really that cruel? Eleanor asked, her voice sharpening. You deny a dying man the chance to see his grandson. Noah isn't his grandson, I said firmly. You and Richard made that clear every day of his early life. You don't get to claim him now that it's convenient for you. And yes, Eleanor, I'm that cruel. I learned from the best. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or doubt. From anger, yes, but also from certainty. I'd spent years learning to set boundaries, learning that I didn't owe them anything, especially not access to my child. Noah was 13 now, old enough to have opinions about his relationships, but not old enough to handle the complexity of a deathbed reconciliation with a grandfather who'd been abusive and negligent. Maybe that made me cruel. Maybe Eleanor was right about that, but I'd spent too long prioritizing other people's feelings over my own well-being and Noah's safety. I wasn't going to start again now. Richard died 3 weeks later. I saw the obituary online. There was a small funeral, apparently, just Eleanor and Chloe and a handful of people who hadn't completely abandoned them. I didn't go. I didn't send flowers. I felt nothing except a distant sort of relief that this chapter was truly, finally closed. Noah asked about it when he saw me looking at the obituary on my laptop. That's Richard, right? Your stepfather. Yes, I said. Are you sad? I considered lying, considered giving him some platitude about death being sad even when the relationship was complicated. But I'd promised myself I'd always be honest with him about the important things. No, I said, I'm not sad. He hurt us, and he never took responsibility for that, never tried to make it right. I'm not glad he's dead, but I'm not sad either. I'm just relieved that he can never hurt us again. Noah nodded slowly. Okay, he said. That makes sense. He paused, then added, I don't remember him very well. Just feelings. Mostly. Like being scared and not knowing why. You don't have to remember him, I told him. You don't have to feel anything about this. Whatever you feel or don't feel is okay. He hugged me then, this gangly, almost teenager who was starting to be taller than me, and he said, I'm glad we got out, Mom. I'm glad you were strong enough to leave. Me too, baby, I said. Me too. Eleanor tried to reach out a few more times over the next year. Cards on holidays that I threw away unopened. An email asking if we could meet for coffee, to talk, to try to mend things. I never responded. I'd said everything I needed to say, and I had nothing left to give her. Maybe that was ungenerous of me. Maybe in her grief and her old age she genuinely changed, genuinely wanted to make amends. But it wasn't my job to absolve her, to make her feel better about the choices she'd made. That was work she'd have to do on her own. Chloe sent me a message on Noah's 14th birthday, through social media. It was a photo of a toy fire truck, a vintage one from the 1,950 seconds that must have cost a small fortune. I saw this and thought of Noah, she wrote. I remember what happened that day in the supermart. I should have stood up for him. For both of you. I was a coward. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I understand if you can't. Happy birthday to your son. I showed the message to Noah. He looked at the photo of the antique fire truck, then at the collection on his shelves, then at me. What do you think I should do? I asked him. She's your aunt, technically. If you want to have a relationship with her, I'll support that. He thought about it for a long moment, this thoughtful boy who'd inherited my eyes and my stubbornness but also developed his own kindness, his own sense of justice. Maybe someday, he said, but not yet. I don't really know her, and what I do know isn't great. But maybe when I'm older, if she keeps trying to be better, maybe then? I smiled at his wisdom. That sounds fair. Can you tell her thank you for remembering, though? He added. That's nice of her, even if we're not ready for more than that. I sent Chloe a brief message thanking her for the birthday wishes, telling her that Noah appreciated her thinking of him, and that perhaps someday in the future they could build a relationship. She responded with a simple heart emoji and no pressure, no demands for immediate reconciliation. Maybe she really had changed. Maybe therapy and losing her parents' support and facing the consequences of her complicity had taught her something about humility and respect. Time would tell. Noah graduated from middle school at the top of his class. He got into a prestigious STEM-focused high school on a partial scholarship that I supplemented with my savings. He'd grown into a confident, compassionate young man who stood up for bullied kids and volunteered at a community center teaching coding to younger children. He had dreams of becoming a software engineer, of maybe starting his own company someday. I want to build something that helps people. He told me one night while we were eating takeout on the balcony, watching the sun set over the city, something that makes their lives easier, or safer, or better. Like what you did for us, you know? You built us a better life from nothing. Not from nothing. I corrected him gently. From courage. From choosing to believe we deserved better. That's all it takes sometimes. One choice, one moment of courage, and everything can change. He smiled at me, this young man who barely remembered the scared little boy who'd watched his toy fire truck get smashed, who'd cried in confusion about why his grandparents didn't love him. You're pretty wise, you know that? I learned the hard way, I said, but I'm glad I did, because it brought us here. On the 10th anniversary of the day we left Eleanor and Richard's house, I did something I'd been planning for years. I took Noah back to that supermart, to the toy aisle where it had all started. The store had been remodeled since then. The layout changed, but I found where the fire trucks were now displayed. Pick one, I told Noah. Any one you want. He looked at me, confused. Mom, I'm 16. I don't really play with fire trucks anymore. I know, I said. But this isn't about playing. It's about remembering. It's about marking how far we've come. So pick one, please. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He looked at the selection carefully, then chose a red one, bright and shiny and new, like the one Richard had destroyed, but different. Better. This one, he said. We bought it, and I didn't use a credit card or check the price first or worry about whether we could afford it. I paid cash, and I paid without hesitation, without fear, because I could, because that's what freedom looked like. Outside in the parking lot, Noah held that fire truck and looked at me with tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said, for everything, for protecting me, for leaving, for showing me what real love looks like. You never have to thank me for loving you, I said, pulling him into a hug. That's not something you earn or deserve. It's just what you are. Loved. Always. We stood there in that parking lot for a long moment, holding each other, holding this symbol of our journey from pain to healing, from abuse to freedom. And I thought about that day 10 years ago, when I'd been so broken and so scared, when I'd thought I had nothing and nowhere to go. I'd been wrong. I'd had everything that mattered. I'd had Noah, and I'd had myself, and I'd had the capacity to choose something different. To choose life over survival, hope over despair, action over acceptance. The fire truck sat on Noah's desk all through high school, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of cruelty can become catalysts for the greatest acts of courage. That sometimes you have to break before you can become stronger. That sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction or payback or making someone suffer the way they made you suffer. Sometimes the best revenge is simply this: living well, loving fully, and refusing to let the people who hurt you define who you become. Eleanor passed away when Noah was 19, during his freshman year of college. Chloe called to tell me, her voice tired and sad. She had a stroke, Chloe said. It was quick. She didn't suffer. I'm sorry for your loss, I said, and I meant it. Not for Eleanor, but for Chloe, who despite everything had lost her mother. There's going to be a small service, Chloe said. Just family. I know you probably don't want to come, but I wanted you to know you'd be welcome if you did. Both you and Noah. I thought about it. About the woman who'd raised me and abused me, who'd made me feel worthless for 18 years, but who, at the end, had at least tried to reach out, to make some kind of amends. About closure and forgiveness and what, if anything, I owed to the dead. I'll come, I said finally, just for an hour, to pay my respects. Not for her, but for the little girl I used to be, who deserved better. The service was held in a small chapel, sparsely attended. Just Chloe and her husband, a few distant cousins, some people from Eleanor's church. I sat in the back with Noah beside me, and I listened to the eulogy that painted Eleanor as a devoted mother and charitable community member. It wasn't entirely lies. She had been those things. But it wasn't the whole truth either. Afterward, Chloe approached us cautiously. She'd aged well, looked peaceful in a way she never had when we were younger. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means more than you know." "How are you?" I asked, and I was surprised to find I actually wanted to know. "I'm okay," she said. "Therapy helps. So does time. I'm teaching now, middle school English, and I volunteer with an organization that helps children in foster care, trying to, I don't know, make up for things in some small way." Noah spoke up then, surprising both of us. "That's good," he said. "Kids in foster care need people who care." Chloe smiled at him, tears in her eyes. "You've grown into such a good person, Noah. Your mom did an incredible job raising you." "She did," he agreed simply. "We didn't stay long after that. We offered our condolences, shook hands, made vague promises to stay in touch that might or might not come true. But as we left that chapel and walked back to our car, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but something like peace. The story was over. All the main characters had played their parts. The villain had faced consequences. The hero had survived and thrived, and now we could close the book and move on to whatever came next. Noah got his degree in computer science. He got a job at a tech startup making more money than I'd ever dreamed of earning. He moved into his own apartment, started dating a sweet girl named Jennifer who treated him with respect and kindness. He called me twice a week, came over for dinner every Sunday, still kept that red fire truck on his bookshelf even though his apartment was full of sophisticated tech gadgets and expensive furniture. "It reminds me," he said once when I asked why he kept it, "that material things aren't what make us rich. Love does. Courage does. You do." I retired early from my management position, took a part-time consulting job that let me travel and pursue hobbies I'd never had time for. I learned to paint. I joined a book club. I started dating a man named Thomas who'd never been married, who had no children but loved being around Noah, who treated me like I was precious and remarkable and worthy of gentle, patient love. On the 20th anniversary of the day we left, Noah took me back to that supermart one more time. We walked through the toy aisle together, this grown man and his middle-aged mother, and we looked at the fire trucks that had once symbolized our pain and our freedom. "You know what's funny?" Noah said. "I became a software engineer, but I'm working on an app now that connects foster children with resources and support. Fire safety features, emergency contacts, things like that. Kind of came full circle to the fire truck thing." I laughed, delighted by the synchronicity. "That's perfect." "Yeah," he said. "I figure if our story helped us survive and grow, maybe it can help other kids too, other families. Maybe all that pain wasn't wasted if we can turn it into something good." We didn't buy a fire truck that day. We didn't need to anymore. We'd kept enough of them over the years, enough symbols and reminders. Instead, we bought ice cream from the store's cafe and sat in the parking lot eating it, talking about his app and my painting class, and Thomas's plans to take me to Italy next spring. We talked about ordinary things, beautiful things, the things that make up a well-lived life, and neither of us mentioned Eleanor or Richard or any of the darkness we'd escaped. We'd spent enough time looking backward. Now we were looking forward, toward all the bright possibility that lay ahead. That night, alone in my apartment with Thomas snoring softly beside me, I pulled out an old shoebox from the back of my closet. In it were all the mementos I'd kept from those years. The broken pieces of that first red fire truck, carefully collected and saved. The letter Richard had sent demanding I help with Chloe's wedding. The court documents from the trial. The first paycheck stub from the job Maya had helped me get. I'd kept them as proof, I think. Proof that it had all really happened, that I hadn't imagined the abuse or exaggerated the pain. Proof that I'd survived. But looking at them now, I realized I didn't need proof anymore. I was living proof. Noah was living proof. The life we'd built was all the evidence I needed. I took the shoebox out to the balcony and I burned it, piece by piece, in a metal bowl. I watched the papers curl and blacken, watched the smoke rise into the night sky, watched the past literally go up in flames. It felt like a ritual, like a final letting go of everything that had weighed me down for so long. When it was done, when there was nothing left but ashes, I scattered them into the wind and I whispered, "Thank you." Not thank you to Eleanor and Richard for the abuse that had shaped me, but thank you to myself for being brave enough to leave. Thank you to Maya for offering shelter. Thank you to Daniel for offering justice. Thank you to Noah for being the reason I found my courage. Thank you to every person who'd helped us along the way, who'd seen our worth when we couldn't see it ourselves. And thank you to that little girl I'd been, scared and alone and desperate to be loved, who'd somehow grown into a woman strong enough to demand better. Who'd somehow found the courage to grab her son's hand and walk away from everything she knew into an uncertain future, trusting that anything was better than staying in that toxic cycle of abuse. She'd been right. I'd been right. It had been hard and scary, and there'd been times I'd thought I couldn't do it, couldn't make it work. But I had. We had. And now, 20 years later, I could finally say with complete certainty, it was worth it. Every hard choice, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and fear, it was all worth it for this. For freedom, for peace, for love that didn't come with conditions or cruelty, for a life that was truly, finally mine.